morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Thank you for joining this session in this early morning for some of you, and or afternoon, which is pretty good, and evening for some of you, which is fascinating that we can connect all together via this platform. Let me share my screen first. Um, so you all can see my PowerPoint, right? Great. So let me just go right in. Entering the spring semester this year, I myself was feeling some of symptoms of burnout. And while keeping up with all the work I had to do, I figured the deadline of the proposal for this conference was approaching. And so I wish I could do something with this fascinating conference theme, connecting and becoming ancestors. So meaning that I had some passion at least, right? But no additional time or energy to devote myself to research and writing during the semester when I had to teach both online and in-person courses along with other administrative work, student advising and community service and so on. Well, I'm not saying that I was in an extreme case of busyness in the academia. Rather, I figured it's more like a common workload in this field. If I share the details, many of you may just laugh when saying, well, that's common. But um, the whole thing was a surprise or a shock to me as a junior scholar who is dealing with the new work and the surprising amount of workload during the pandemic, right? And in this world of fear and uncertainty. Well, that's how I got into this theme because it mattered the most for my own being. And finally, produced something. So this has been my journey to examine my well-being and find some solutions and to help others like me navigate through the personal, social, and spiritual issues of burnout. So during this session, I also hope you take this opportunity to review and reflect on your well-being and find your ways for your own spiritual formation. In Korean, one of common ways to say that you're very busy, you may say that you don't even have time to breathe. You may also say that you are so busy that you don't have time to open your eyes and nose. Yes, you don't have time to open your eyes and nose. This joke commonly represents the modern day lifestyle, but if you consider it seriously, it is a threat that interferes your well-being, physically, emotionally, and spiritually. You may say that it's just a part of our culture, our life, and we can't do anything about it. We just need to keep going to survive through. And maybe that's true. It's been my struggle too. Then how can you pause to catch your breath when everybody else around you are running, passing by, and leaving you behind? And moreover, the pandemic over the past 2 years, more than 2 years now, has stopped our daily routines but has not slowed down the pace of the life. Rather, it has exacerbated the issue, and now the burnout syndrome casts a long shadow on the next generations. Emotional drain, physical fatigue, and an underdeveloped spiritual formation mark these individuals. So in this paper, I will reflect the emotional and spiritual status of the generations who are mostly suffering from burnout and explore spiritual responses as a holistic approach to restoring the resiliency. So the goal of this research are to connect with the burnout generation and to understand the current culture and to reconnect with the spiritual practices from my Christian faith and ethnic cultural practices, and to develop a meaningful conversation between the two, particularly through the practice of Hushik, which I will explain later, or the spiritual yearning and thirst of the burnout generation. In her book, Burnout, the Cost of Caring, Christina Maslach defines burnout as a syndrome of emotional exhaustion, depersonalization, and reduce the personal accomplishment that can occur among individuals who do people work of some kind. It is the response to the chronic emotional strain of dealing extensively with other human beings, particularly when they are troubled or having problems. Well, different people have different ways and abilities to cope with emotional and physical stress, and accordingly, the degree of stress of feeling burnout may also vary. But many scholars warn that burnout is far more than feeling blue or having a bad day. It is a chronic state of being out of sync with your job that can be a significant crisis in your life. People with burnout often feel emotional fatigue or indifference and they can treat colleagues, congregants, or patients in a detached or inhumane manner. They can be cynical, less effective at work, and lack a desire for personal achievement. In the long run, this does not help individuals or organizations at all. Burnout can further lead to more serious problems such as chronic fatigue syndrome, anxiety, depression, insomnia, and alcohol and drug abuse. Then, what makes us feel burnout? And Helen Peterson, in her book, Can't Even How Millennials Became the Burnout Generation, she gives a good overview of the job status in the United States in 2019 and 2020, which is a still pre-pandemic era. The ever decreasing middle class, stagnant wages, lack of government or cooperative support for dual income parents, overwork and burnout, outsourcing, and anxiety are felt by many people in this era of endless layoffs and restructuring. Peterson focuses on particularly how the millennials are uniquely influenced by all of these factors. And she notes, we were raised to believe that if we worked hard enough, we could win the system of American capitalism and meritocracy, or at least live comfortably within it. But something happened in the late 2010s, and we looked up from our work and realized there is no winning. There's no winning the system when the system itself is broken. We are the first generation since the Great Depression where many of us will find ourselves worse off than our parents. The overarching trend of upward mobility has finally reversed itself, smack dab into the prime earning years of our lives. We are drowning in student debts, an estimated 37,000 per debtor. That's permanently stunted our financial lives. Microsoft's 2021 Work Trend Index offers also some interesting data. According to it, global average 42% feel overworked, 39% feel exhausted, and moreover, Gen Z is at risk and will need to be re-energized. It is kind of a dilemma, I think, for all of us in this society that the young generation that should have the most energy is in crisis as they just start their social life. Well, but Peterson also makes it clear that all generations are not just millennials or Gen Z, all generations are struggling in this challenging time. And I agree with that very point. The problem with burnout is not just one or two young generations issue, not anymore. The more I studied on this issue, the more I realized that it's bigger than you think. It's more serious. And the pandemic shook the whole ground of the whole life and accelerated social change. And the firewood accumulated over time is burning the younger generations and even beyond. Anybody and everybody living in this era. And in his book, The Burnout Society, Korean-German philosopher Byung-Chul Han criticizes that we are living in the hyperactive, achievement-driven, and success-driven society. A modern society valued for its successful result encourages every individual to overcompete and engage in every possible activity. People are always pressed for time, always on, and never really resting. They feel burnout when the reward for all that is unclear. So Byung Han comes to think of a modern life as a completely exhausted life. Leiter and Maslach suggest social factors of burnout in modern society, which are kind of worth noting. And from more than 10 factors they examined, here are three key points. First, they argue that the working environment of modern society has lost its humanity. Not only in the United States, but also the corporate world has become bigger than ever and has reduced humans to tools or targets for profit seeking. In addition, information technology and smartphones, of course, they give us convenience and have become essential elements in our daily lives. However, they have the ability to invade our private time and disrupt sleep patterns to overturn personal recovery cycles. They also pointed, as the third point, to the danger of terrorism and violence and the attacks of the deadly virus as social factors driving burnout. Their study cited the terror attack on September 11, 2001, and SARS as examples, but sadly and interestingly or sadly, but these can be simply replaced by the various issues of violence these days and COVID-19, even after their 20 more than 15 years, less than 10 years, 15 plus years of their original research. So the condition is not getting better at all, but getting worse. In summary, many studies have shown that burnout dimensions are interconnected with various aspects of the workplace, living environment, and socio-cultural factors. The study of burnout revealed the key symptoms from individual efficiency and passion to exhaustion, cynicism, individual inefficiency, and the sense of uselessness. In this challenging world we live in, it seems understandable that the relationship between work or survival itself is becoming increasingly tense. Everyone is struggling to deal with ever-changing social, economic, and ethical issues. Then what can we do to stop the cycle of burnout culture? Ooh, what can we do? Big question. First of all, the studies suggest that you need to find the source of the problem that causes burnout. Burnout is generally recognized when it is job-focused, but the resulting chronic stress is associated with various causes and leads to more various problems, such as financial problems, relationship issues, and carrying burdens and physical issues. It is therefore important to grasp the underlying issue first and foremost. Once you have identified the issue, the problem, it is necessary to get away from it and try to see yourself and your situation objectively. Getting out of high tense and stressful situation, even temporarily, is helpful. We can also try to become a better self by acquiring various skills, practicing relationship skills and stress management to escape burnout. Then another solution is changing the workplace culture that causes burnout to you. If you cannot change yourself, you can try to change the culture and policies of your current workplace. But if you cannot expect any better from your current work, then you can try to change your job. No. All of these solutions ultimately require a collective effort beyond the search for a personal solution. To change the culture of the community that ultimately causes burnout, solutions must be sought at the organizational level. Then how do we cope with the polarization of society's economy and power? There will be always some people who are so comfortable with their economical, financial status and power, while so many others are struggling to live by. So confronting against the violence and the discrimination and finding ways to implement gender, race, and other justice are a great resistance to social burnout. Also, we must seek ways to ensure fair social distribution and strive to reform the healthcare system. And many scholars also argue that the implementation of the universal basic income could be a foundational social security system to protect human rights to rest. In order to prevent burnout from being regarded as just an individual problem, it is also necessary to recognize and consider that many of our colleagues and neighbors in the community may suffer burnout in various forms. And that way, that is the beginning of the solidarity that we can practice in this burnout society. Then we need to continue with institution-wide, community-wide open conversation for transformation. Yet, however, it is not enough to ultimately solve the issue. The burnout is the personal, communal, and spiritual problem that we need to deal with. So here I see a responsibility and role of religious education. When other fields like psychology, sociology, and business management explore this issue and produce some solutions, what do we say? As religious educators, what do we do for the burnout society? As we need physical and psychological approach, I believe we need spiritual approach. We need divine recovery. It sounds like a cliche, but it's okay to say no to more work. It's okay to say no to more work. I need to say it to myself again and again. Right? For people in a hyper-competitive society who constantly have to prove themselves with achievement, saying no is practically so difficult, right? And often it requires a lot of courage and practice. So this is one of first steps to get away from the burnout culture. It's okay to say no. And taking a day off and taking a Sabbath is another step of saying no to the current culture. If you think about it, we lost the very meaning of keeping the Sabbath. And Jefferson Bethke, in his book, To Hell with the Hustle, he insists the importance of keeping Sabbath as a spiritual practice. And he argues, as a culture, we are losing ritual and we are losing rhythm. We are losing rootedness and depth and anchoredness. Because time and rhythm and ritual, these things are no longer external forces that we must submit to. In this success-driven society, keeping the Sabbath can give people the wrong perception that they are wasting time uselessly. We need to think about this part too. I have that concern. I have that fear. Oh, I can do so many things in this time if I don't keep it, right? However, the value of the Sabbath is completely different as God distinguishes the holiness of this so-called empty time. For the efficiency of the other days, we need to empty the to-do list for this day and effectively rest. Borrowing Byung-Chul Han's concept, we need to consider the usefulness of uselessness. Then God's divine rest and healing begins here. For Bethke, it is in this slowness and silence of this day that you will find a space where your old self begins to fade away and your new self begins to renew, and God's truth slowly but surely fills you to reestablish and reconnect new identity. It means taking a Sabbath is more like a radical break in this modern society from the current culture. It's not like a cliche like rest. Sabbath is a radical break. And this notion and practice of Sabbath further leads us to dream of recovering the practice of the Jubilee. Bethke puts it as a society-wide reset button. Well, I'm not going to explain what Jubilee is. I believe all of you know. But is these concepts of rest or Sabbath or Jubilee new to you? Is it something you don't know? No. For most of us, at least, we already know. The ancestors of our faith and the biblical grounds lead us to this direction. We already have hopes and visions given from ancient times. However, we have not seen it since the Bible era, and we have not practiced these fundamental changes and reset in the modern society. We can just keep going and keep working until we die. Each day, every week, these spiritual exercises should help us regain the rhythm and breath of life and become a driving force of our will and energy to reform and transform our society. In addition, it is necessary to keep spiritual practices through various methods to restore relationship with God. So the next thing to look at is the various approaches to spiritual formation. Spiritual formation, the development of one's soul, has been classically defined as the process of being conformed to the image of Christ for the sake of others. In a burnout society, it is very important for the tired soul to restore that divine image and relationship and firmly establish that deep roots of existence. The author of Sacred Pathways, Gary Thomas, argues that many faith formation models in the Western Church try to connect the soul to God through Bible study, praise, and prayer, but fail to create a solid spiritual link by excluding the other various ways. So Thomas offers these 9 soul pathways: naturalist, sensate, traditionalist, ascetics, activists, caregivers, enthusiasts, contemplatives, and intellectuals. And just, while reviewing this, I hope you can find your own way. I hope you can identify that fits you, that suits you the best. So the first of the 9 spiritual paths is described as a naturalist. These are the people who are best connected to God when they are outdoors. They sense and experience God deeper in nature than they do in reading theology books in a building. The second path is sensate. Sensate Christians enjoy worshiping with all their senses. Thomas describes when these Christians worship, they want to be filled with sight, sounds, and smells that overwhelm them. Incense, intricate architecture, classical music, and formal language send their hearts soaring. That's the sensate. And the third path is about traditionalists. Traditionalists like to connect to God through rituals, symbols, sacraments, and sacrifices. For them, other less structural ways seem to be outside the boundaries. The fourth is the path of ascetics. They are best connected to God through solitude, simplicity, and prayer. Often, ascetics have difficulty with complex programming and active projects. They feel deeply connected with God in a simple and quiet environment. The fifth path, the activist, finds action and confrontations as a means of worship. Activists serve the God of justice and often focus on social justice issues for the oppressed. The sixth is the caregiver's path. Caregivers like to provide service to others physically or emotionally. It is to experience and practice God's love by loving others. Caregivers often regard the different pathways as selfish. Seventh, there is a path of enthusiasts. As sensates want to be surrounded by beauty and intellectuals love to grapple with the concepts. Enthusiasts are inspired by joyful celebration. And the eighth is the path of contemplatives. Contemplatives adore God and often describe God as their lover in their prayer life. They do not like public attention nor try to be in the spotlight. They just want to stay in divine peace. The ninth spiritual path Thomas described is about intellectuals. Intellectuals try to get to know God more deeply through wrestling with ideas and concepts. These Christians live in the world of concepts. Faith, for example, is something to be understood as much as experienced. They may feel closest to God when they first understand something new about God and faith in life. This path may be considered less spiritual than others. So, do you see your path here? Or something new you can come up with? Please share later. Thomas also provides Bible verses, praises, activity recommendations, and discussion questions, illustrative figures for each path. It helps individuals find a way that suits best for them and adds depth to their spiritual formation. And as he also noted, no one uses only one path. Practicing different approaches will help to develop a whole healthy spirituality. And then the next thing to look at, following my own journey to find some spiritual solutions, next thing to look at is the method of spiritual rest found in my Korean culture. The research of burnout eventually and naturally led me to the importance of rest. A good rest is necessary for recharging at the psychological and physical level of an individual. And there is a meaning of resistance in a society of high competition and high achievement. And the purpose of spiritual rest is to escape from the burnout culture and to restore relationship with God and to restore the community around you. And this method and meaning of a holy rest and various approaches of restoring that divine relationship were discussed earlier. And in that regard, I now focus on the concept of rest, 휴식 in Korean, with a Korean Chinese theology. 휴식 means to stop what you're doing and take a break. It literally means resting. And in Chinese characters, it consists of two characters, hu and shik, as you see. And hu means rest, shik means breathing, breathing. The first character, hu, is then made up of another two characters, a person and a tree. This represents an image of a person resting there or under a tree. Since ancient times, people have regarded trees as living and holy creatures as a medium for communicating with the energy of the sky and the earth. And the ritual of worship remains as a dangsan tree in Korean culture, and the Buddha's tree is also another good example of it. And dangsan tree, for your information, dangsan tree is a village guardian tree where people have worship and fellowship around the community. So therefore, the meaning of hue can be interpreted as a person who rests under the shade of the tree. But in addition to that simple understanding, it also means connecting with the divine energy of heaven and earth through that sacred tree. And the next character, shik, is made up of another two characters, self and heart or mind. It depicts oneself focusing on the heart and the mind. Ancient people believed that their mind or the soul stayed in their heart, in the physical heart. That way, shik, breathing, is focusing yourself on your heart and mind. Then when you put these two characters together, hue and shik, it means hyushik, we get breathing under the tree. And Hushik is taking a break from your work and catching your breath under the tree to communicate with the heavenly energy. Is that interesting? I found it was my aha moment actually. In that way, Hushik guides us to holy rest and holy breathing. Through Hushik, you restore the connection with the Creator and the Creator's world. Beyond the 24/7 connected lifestyle, we are encouraged to take a holy break from time to time. We are encouraged to change our attention to the seemingly useless time and space. Just like the ancient yet valid practice of Hushik, by emptying our thoughts through mindful breathing, or if by contemplative prayer or by centering prayer, we can recover to be a divine vessel to be filled with the Holy Spirit. It was my personal aha moment of finding meaning and role of my ancestors' wisdom and practice, and of connecting Eastern and Western practices of mindful breathing and prayer. From Thomas' descriptions of soul pathways, Hushik is close to the approaches of naturalists, contemplatives, and ascetics. But I believe Hushik doesn't stop there. But by holy breathing, it encourages and reinforces other pathways as well. Howard Thurman, a Christian mystic and spiritual leader of the civil rights movement, spoke often about the need for contemplative time and space, the need to pause from engagement in life in order to better align oneself with God's will. He insisted that time apart with God was necessary for faithful engagement in the world. And he encouraged so many people to retreat in prayer in order to be clear of vision and strengthened for the difficult work ahead. So, to conclude, in this uncertain time, in this time of fear and so many work, and the pandemic and the ongoing concerns for social justice and violence and all that, to pause again can be a saving grace, enabling us to be more authentic, inclusive, less divisive, and to rest in the one who makes the sun to shine on good and bad alike. The Hushik, to stop and breathe with God, can help us avoid exhaustion, anger, and confusion and cynicism. And that pause, that divine pause, the prayer, that moment of remembrance and reconciliation, may be just what we need to keep hope and keep alive and keep being healed and keep dream. And that's part of my journey. So thank you for listening. And yes, let me now stop sharing.
So let's take a moment to at least applaud and say thank you so much. And then Heesung, there's already a question in the chat. So maybe we could start there. And Karen Marie, do you want to just unmute and share your question?
Sure. Heesung, first, thank you very much. And as I mentioned when I first came on, I'm very intrigued by the material that you've presented to us. I was curious about sort of two things that are related. One was to learn more about the sort of research basis for Thomas's 9 types. Where is he deriving these types from? Are they primarily from scripture or psychosocial studies or ethnographic observation or educational theories and or something else? Like, where is he getting the 9 types from? Because we often hear these sort of sets of types or approaches. And so I'm just curious about that. And then I'm really interested in the, and I'm not going to pronounce it correctly, the Hushik. Okay, thank you. How well or how does it fit with various of Thomas's types? Since you've given us both of those, is it something that can fit into all of them? Is it mostly fit with certain ones, like the contemplative one? I'd be curious about your thinking in terms of that integration. So where do Thomas's types come from, and how does this new idea concept that you've introduced fit with those types?
So thank you for those questions. And first, Thomas 9 types, although he doesn't clearly describe his resources, he uses a lot of ethnographic observations of his congregations, and also from his experience in teaching and learning and teaching environment. And he also uses a lot of psychosocial studies. And also, if you are familiar with Enneagram research, he also goes with it. So in another resource that he produced, he goes with these 9 types with 9 Enneagrams and how it connects to each other. So that was also another interesting point, but didn't get to it. And after this research, and he produced the educational resources, so which is also fascinating. So any congregations or groups can use this resource. So I think it goes both ways, although he didn't clearly describe his resources, right? But getting all the resources from his experiences and researches from including Enneagram and psychological studies, he also produces that connections to be the educational resources of the areas. And as I just briefly made a connection about Heesung with the Thomas types. At first, it looks like, you know, it is close to the pathways of naturalists and contemplatives and ascetics, I think. But I believe it can be also applied to other types. You know, the holy breathing and meditate prayer can be a foundational practice for other types as well. For example, for intellectuals, you know, I believe we have a lot of intellectuals in this group, but we also need to pray, right? So developing the approach of Heesung will be the future task for me. So how it can be also applied to other types, you know, so, you know, following the Thomas types, I believe there are other types of, you know, spiritual pathways, but just for now, following these 9 types, it can be, there are a lot of possibilities from this point.
I notice Monique has her hand up next.
Thank you so much. Yes, I try to lower it while I speak. Yeah, that's better. Hello, Heesung. Thank you so much for sharing all this. I'm so happy that I raised up this early to get this, because you said it somehow along the road, you had a sort of aha moment. I had that for all the 20 minutes or 30 that you were speaking, because it was very, very condensed, but so very much information. Thank you. First of all, thank you very much indeed. And don't ever think you're not also a spiritual intellectual, because wow, this is something we really need. So I sort of try to do it a bit with students, but I don't want to talk too much about me, but especially with students who have nothing with religious education or whatsoever. Students in economics and in law and at our university, who often have nothing to do with theological department. And the only thing I gave them last semester was rest time to share their thoughts about what was going on, living in a room in a city. That complete remote situation you described is also the remote situation for international students at our university that doesn't see anything of the city or other people, just sitting in their room doing their lectures in a foreign country. It's such a remote world. And I just got them, when possible, to the campus in small groups and have time to share, be at rest and think, where do I find some energy? And it's all so well put in all this theory you add here. So I kept writing, and I hope Mary sends us also the recording that I can rewrite, but I would love to share more with you over email or anything about this kind of research, and that we can come up with even the word religious education might not even work, because it's so much bigger. It's about the real issues here in the world now today. And I thank you so much, because I'm a bit tired of the jet lag and sitting here in a very hot Atlanta with a very small air conditioning. So I'm already getting a cold. But yesterday I found, I don't know whether the camera will take it, a small token here. It's from a tree. And there are many, many squirrels here, and they eat those things till only a small thing is left. And I kept it as a token, and I put it in my table in front of me, because this remote conference is also a bit not the way we hoped for, to really share things on a coffee break. We just have to do it with all the intellectual stuff we share, and that's wonderful. But let's have those moments every now and then and realize, and you brought me many aha moments, and I take this one as a token with me to share that. And thank you once more.
Well, thank you so much for sharing. And I'm really grateful for your story, and I will look forward to connect with you more for further prayer for it together and further research together. Thank you so much. And as you also mentioned, and as I also realized, while the other field in the world, like psychology and sociology, and all other fields are talking about this issue, basically to make people more effective workers, right? But then what do we do? It was also a really aha moment for me that we have not enough information, not enough resource to teach, to educate our congregants, our people, to be more spiritually ready and restored from the burnout culture. So this is the beginning, right? So thank you so much for sharing. And now I see a hand, Chuck.
Good morning, Heesung. Good morning, everybody. Good to see everybody. Thank you for your paper. One of the things that came to mind, a connection, was with Thich Nhat Hanh. Thich Nhat Hanh is a Vietnamese Buddhist monk who has written a lot on mindfulness in his book, Anger. It just reminded me, even though anger is a different emotion from burnout, I think maybe burnout and anger have a partnership or a relationship. And he speaks about being mindful of what we eat and the food that we put into our bodies, and that even eating animals that are not treated properly, animals that might be tortured in the process of us getting the food to eat on the table, that pain of the animal enters into us when we eat that type of food that comes from a suffering animal. And also, of course, just being able to breathe, this emphasis on breathing, and being able to not eat and take in the negative energy that's around us, because he views the negative energy that is so prevalent around us in the polarized society, whether you watch Fox or whether you watch CNN, and whichever perspective you get, it can be something you just need to turn off. And then finally, from the recovery rooms, I'd like to offer something that can go with your paper, and that's the acronym HALT, H-A-L-T. And each of those letters helps people stay sober. And H stands for hungry. So if you're hungry, get something to eat. And the A is anger, or being angry. And if you're angry, talk to someone or breathe. And the third one is the L for lonely. If you're lonely, reach out to somebody, begin to make connections, find someone to talk to. And then the last one, the T, is tired. If you're tired, take a nap and get some sleep. These are really common sense lessons that come from the recovery rooms of someone staying sober that may be on the brink of picking up. And by practicing HALT, which is an acronym meaning stop, think, reflect, breathe, sit under a tree, it can keep somebody sober. So thanks a lot, everybody.
Oh, wow. Thank you for sharing. In this early morning or afternoon or evening that you can practice this. And Chuck, would you please put that on the chat box so we can all remember, or if you have a resource page that you can also share. Thank you. And I see a hand up. Noel.
Oh, thank you for noticing my hand up, and thank you for your paper. Appreciate it. First, could you just maybe say a bit more about Husik and Sabbath? It seems to me they're companions, to say the least, in my mind, as I heard them. So if you could maybe what they have in common and also how the one differs from the other.
Oh, well, in my culture, the Korean culture or Asian culture is not based on the Christian. It's different, right? It's different, and we're not following the Christian calendar. we're not taking a break. We're not taking Hyushik in every 7 days or something like that. So it's similar but different. Hyushik can be a very brief break from time to time in your daily life, or it can be a kind of long-term break from days or weeks, So in that way, it's a bit different from the concept of Sabbath, which is kind of separated from other days by God, and distinguished by God as a holy and the resting day. But as I kind of try to make the connections, and as you also notice, there are a lot of connections that we can make between the holy between Sabbath and Hyushik. So I was trying to make the connection. I was trying to prove that both of them are not just a cliche-like rest that we can take in this modern life, modern lifestyle, but rather we need to keep it as a God's command and as a divine resistance. I will go with that word. Actually, I was going to read quote another book, but it's still coming out, at Rest as Resistance. So my theory will be kind of more completed when that book comes out, right? So in this fall or winter. So it's just still going on. And even though, as I mentioned, even though we all know the concept of rest, the importance of rest and Sabbath, and we all know it, right? But maybe we got so used to it and we don't pay too much attention about the importance of rest, and not just the cliche-like rest, but mindfully taking this rest holy and for our physical and emotional and spiritual recovery. So again, the Hyushik, it literally meant rest for Koreans, but going deeper with the words in Chinese etiology, it was my discovery that it's more than just taking a break. It was more like making that connection with the divine energy, with the creator and the creator's world. So in that way, I was able to make more deeper connection with the holy meaning of the real meaning of Sabbath. So that's my journey.
Thank you. Could I follow up unless somebody else wants to jump in? Anyone else? In thinking about the different times, both in my life and in students' lives and colleagues' lives and so on, where things have become very difficult and almost impossible for individuals to move on, I think your presentation of numerous different paths is useful, very useful, rather than kind of focusing just on one of them, although the exploration of each of them is important. But there's a process of discernment, it seems to me, on the side of, first of all, the individual, and then sometimes a whole community of scholars, for example, in a university, to try to figure out how to proceed in very difficult or impossible situations. And having a kind of an array of possibilities, whether on the active side or on the more contemplative and personal side, is useful to try to work out not only what the situation may call for, but also what individuals, especially if a community is trying to solve a problem. So thank you for both in your presentation of the both here is a good way and here's what other people think are also other good ways, and they follow them often, because the oftentimes it's a real soul searcher and mind searcher to try to figure out how to deal with difficult situations, or as I say, impossible, and still live through them.
Thank you so much for sharing. Thank you all so much for wonderful comments and questions and conversations. And now I wonder if we can take about 10 minutes of a conversation in a breakout room to just review these pathways and to rest with each other. How about that? Is it possible, Mary, to
Yes,
create?
I will right now open up rooms. There you
Okay, thank you everyone for joining and for participating in the breakout room discussions. I wonder if there's anything that you want to share. What happened? What great conversation was going on in your breakout room?
Hi, if I may start, Heesung, I hope I pronounce your name right.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. I apologize to the members of my breakup room. My camera is not working, and I don't know how to fix it. I'm alone in the house, have no IT support. Anyhow, I thank you so much for your presentation, and we had good chit chat in our room. But even as we did that, in my mind, I was processing how much of the rest as resistance, the 9 soul pathways, how all that fits into the God talk, because it seems that is while what you described is an interplay between an idea, a concept of God, and the idea of human solidarity. Could anybody participate in any of these pathways who has not a clear idea of some form of God or some divine, something spiritual in life? How do you frame that? How did you am I making sense in my questioning?
If I kind of understand correctly, that your question is about the different pathways and the connection with my own interpretation of taking a rest and taking the Hyushik, and how it can be applied all together in Christian ways. Is that correct?
Not necessarily, with some theology at the background, with some divine person as the orchestrator of all this, or who from, if we say rest, and this rest is available, is it just a concept, or for you or for me as something, that nourishment that spirituality affords me, because there is a God that exists and who loves me and wishes me well, while everything else is crashing in on me?
Okay. Is anybody who can also chime in from the same breakout room?
If I understand what Father is asking, it's how we relate the 9 pathways to belief in God or in a higher power or transcendence. Could someone who doesn't believe in God perhaps practice these 9 pathways or any of these? Or
Actually, just to introduce 9 pathways this way is just too short, right? So I need to recommend you to read the whole book along with the study guide, because that study guide particularly introduces the educational approaches that you can apply to yourself and to the congregations following the Bible studies and Bible scripture and activities and all the connections you may find it really helpful. And also it has a illustrated figures from ancient times, from Bible times, and the modern times, so that you can also see the role models for the each pathways. So I can describe all that in this in this short meeting. We will need another semester to go all over that, right? So please go and check the book if you're really interested in learning about the 9 pathways particularly. And yeah, and I see one of comments, I may skip a couple of them, but I see a comment from Karen Marius, and a member of our breakout room spoke of how the tree might be a channel for the ancestors, that sitting under a tree is also part of his African tradition. Yes, we wondered about how this idea crosses cultures. Yes, actually, that's the point. That's the point. In the Western-centric or Christian-centric cultures and understandings, we see God's divine power only in certain directions. But if we really look around and find some ways, there are a lot of common spiritual practices that we can connect to each other. And of course, when I had that aha moment with my Korean concept of Hyushik, then I also remembered that the African tradition and the movie, the Avatar, if you already watched it. So just recognizing all different cultures and the particularity and universality all together, that we can have kind of richer experience of divine presence and healing. That's what I believe. And I see a hand from Dan.
Hi, thank you for your paper. For the last 13 years, I've been a youth pastor in Silicon Valley, working with kids who are struggling with burnout. We had an epidemic of teen suicides in Silicon Valley a few years ago, so this is a very challenging and difficult problem. In our breakout room, Ayesha comes out of a background in education, and the two of us were thinking that this is a simply marvelous approach to dealing with burnout, and we were both interested and enthusiastic about the approach. But I don't want to speak for Ayesha, but I felt that it would be very helpful to have you report on how this actually works in practice. I was trying to figure out how this would work with Silicon Valley kids, and I have a hard enough time getting them to come to church, let alone sit still under a tree, because they're all under such enormous pressure. So I hope as you further your research, I guess this is a plea for you as you further your research, to do some some actual hands-on research with people and get into some of the practicalities of how one would actually make this work.
I can jump in just to add on to what Dan said as well. So we were talking, and I shared that I worked in many toxic, very toxic environments, and I found myself transitioning from approach to approach. So for example, engaging in a more contemplative approach, and eventually, you know, taking on more of an activist role and so forth. And it was all for naught, right? I love the idea of Heesung. I hope I pronounced it correctly. And I see it as very valuable. However, in such environments, when you know, one might decide to engage in that practice or take a break, unfortunately, the mind can then, you know, resort to the experiences in the environment as opposed to like really taking oneself out of the environment holistically. So that's kind of what I would like to know. How exactly, what's like a very practical way that one can engage this very useful practice to be as beneficial as it intends to be. Thank you.
Thank you both. Aisha, if I also pronounce it correctly, Aisha, and Dan's comments and questions. And again, this is the beginning. This is the beginning of all the work. And again, the concept of Heesung is a new one that I created. I couldn't find any good resources about this research. So I created my own. I've heard about it from my experience, but no academic type of resources about the concept of Heesung. So this is the beginning of the whole thing. Then I also last night I've been thinking about how I can make it more practical. Of course, we are all practical theologians and religious educators. We need approaches, right? So that's the next step. And you also raised that very important question, important point, how we can make it to particular case more effective, like for example, as Dan mentioned about for the Silicon Valley kids. So that's really interesting. And that'll be, of course, my next step. And if anybody wants to join me, I will appreciate your comments and work. So please feel free to email me and please feel free to work with me, right? All right, so it'll be probably the last comment or question from Paulus.
Okay, thank you. I already Hwang. I'm maybe a wrong spell, Professor Hwang.
That's fine.
Okay.
Perfect.
I'm Paulus from Indonesia, and in breakout room I with Professor Hwang, and when we discussed about take the rest, and I think from Indonesian perspective, when we talk about burnout, not only refers to pandemic situation, but talk about the radicalism, terrorism, maybe from fundamentalism activists, that terrorism always happen as a part of Indonesia and happen in Indonesia. And Mr. Wang asked to me how to religious education take a rest or solve this problem. And I share about there are so many kind Indonesia churches in Indonesia too. Something like help biblical study, how to teach the inclusive or pluralism Christian, open and work together with another religion, and to stop bombing terrorism from Indonesian Christian perspective. But maybe we cannot do another religion, maybe same with us, but we can encourage them to also teach how to be inclusive religious person from their perspective. I think this is the one way how to solve burnout in take a rest situation in this context. Maybe not just relate with pandemic or maybe so many kind of situation in another countries, but Indonesian is this is a strong point to talk about this. Thank you for this opportunity.
Oh, thank you for sharing your story from Indonesia. And I think you are another person that you need to stay with, touch with me. So in that way, we can all work together in collaboration and solidarity, and also to um, decolonize the Western type of understanding of spirituality and religious education. So that's one thing I'm really interested in. That I'd like to make connections and do a lot of work with you all, right, to develop this idea and eventually to help others, our congregants, and including children and youth and or even seniors, to get away from the spiritual burnout and hopefully all the social burnout, that we can solve all the issues, right? So thank you so much, everybody. And even, originally when I was signed up in this session with another person to talk about the promise of TikTok, that's something that I've been really looking forward. Maybe we could find some answers there, right? But that happened. And I was expecting to have less than an hour for my own presentation, but we spent too much time together. Thank you for your robust conversation and questions and all the input together. And let me have another 5 minutes of hushik, 5 minutes of break.
Thank you again so much. And please fill out the feedback form, which is in the chat and also on the schedule. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you, Heesung, for your paper.